The hat? Like, show the hair?
Whip it back and forth?
Do I do the hair or do I do the hat?
Damn. I like the hat.
You like the hat?
It's cool on you though.
All right, what about the jacket though? We're gonna do the jacket.
You know what this? Okay.
All right, what?
It's got a red dot.
There's a red dot? All right, good. That means you did it right.
At least in the bottom left corner.
Yep. Here.
Well, Mr.
Oh,
Ben
yeah.
Shmikovic, or...
That's about right.
Oh, okay.
It's not even close.
Okay. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, where you are right now.
Well, hello. My name is Ben Smelkovic, and I am part of the creative team here at the church at Rancho Bernardo. I'm also a freelance videographer, cinematographer, and student at Cal State San Marcos studying art, media, and design. And I guess today we're going to be doing a little bit of Photoshop, which is the thing you ask a video person to do, huh?
It is, you know.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, yeah, that's just some of the things I do. I met Joseph on he asked me to come help bail him. Actually, no, it was our mutual friend, Jack. He asked me to help bail them out on a shoot that they were doing. Their videographer canceled on them like last minute, and they were up. Where were you guys even at? You were like
up in Julian area.
You were up in Julian, and the guy said he wasn't going to be showing up there, and you're like, hey, can you come up and film? I was like, sure. So that video was the Strength by Humility, and then again we did the DeGuyer project, and that film was great. That one was more planned out. It was great, although the ending felt like a 24-hour film festival with how fast we had to get the edit done. And then our most recent project that you and I have done together was which was a project that I had to do for school. But yeah, it was good times. In terms of what we're doing today, like I said, we're gonna be doing a little bit of Photoshop action. Have you ever used Photoshop before?
The only time and I can't even say I used it, was when I was doing that World War II film with you. Mm-hmm. And I was half asleep when you showed me.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you were pretty knocked out. Well, the thing is that like, it's good to be, like the triple threat, photographer, videographer, and then graphic designer. Like those are all things that nowadays, especially if you're going to be working in just digital media in general, those are all skills that you need to be well versed in. So even though video is my primary wheelhouse, you still need to know how to do things like thumbnails, because your videos are going to be going somewhere and it's going to look tacky if you just have like a screen grab from your stuff. So I recently did a shoot, actually this morning, with a man named Josh Hotzenpiller. He's one of the leaders here at the church, but he also is an entrepreneur and businessman. And he was doing a talk he was asked to do a talk by this company, and they wanted a video of his talk so they could see whether or not they wanted to have him at the event. And he didn't have one, so he asked me to help film it for him. And, that's something that, if you're gonna be uploading, you're sharing it, especially if you're sharing to executives, you're just like, oh, here's my video. And it's like, just like the weird still face of like you kinked in your, it's like, no, get out of there, get that out of here. So thumbnails are something important to know how to make, and they're very simple. And honestly, it's much easier than I imagine most people think. A lot of people look at Photoshop and they're trying to do it because they're making like crazy art and compositing. And that's definitely an avenue of art and design. You could totally go down that route. But just knowing the utilitarian value of Photoshop, I feel like is, quite valuable in itself. So let's just look at what we did here. This is typical, I'd say, corporate style, big text thumbnail. There's definitely some things you could fix and change about it and argue whether or not it's actually good design or not. But the main thing is it emphasizes the text, which is the most important thing, the face and a person, and then also just like the name. So it just gives you like all the information that you need, but primarily just like the title, because the thumbnail is the first thing that's gonna actually grab you. And in terms of just a design thing in general, a lot of people when they come to, like, you finish your project and you're working on your branding, you try to figure out what you're gonna do to make it look good, right? Like I didn't have any instructions on what to do for a thumbnail. I was told by a certain someone that he needed a Photoshop tutorial, so I threw something together real quick.
I was guilty right there.
Yeah, a little guilty.
But I mean, where was your kind of knowledge, personal knowledge, from Photoshop come from YouTube or someone else that you knew?
A lot of it was just like being told to do things and then having to figure it out. And then if I couldn't figure it out, it was looking it up. You'd be surprised how much you could, I mean, I guess you aren't, it's one of those things where it's like you're not surprised, but people still forget how much like there actually is and how easy it is to like find answers for problems in like Photoshops and like industry standard programs. So if there was something I didn't know how to do, I would look it up. But for the most part, it was like trial and error and figuring it out. And also a good design tip is to give yourself, like one of my professors, Leslie Foster described it this way: you need to give yourself time for play, and then you need to develop enough time to like hate the project you're working on. Like you can't just be in a state where you're constantly rushed and deadlined and you like don't have time to actually foster and grow and develop your idea. And then you also need to have time to have play, because most of the time just messing around with something and making it weird, making it funky and abstract, like sure, it may not work. Like, you know, I could do some crazy stuff here and make Josh look like an absolute madman, right? But I wouldn't do that for this. But in the process of doing that, I could discover something new that I would not have thought of beforehand. Everything looks as good as it can be until you see something better, right? So you should try to either trick or at least pursue something that is better. In terms of this, though, again, I didn't have much to go off of. I just had the photos, which I took after we finished the shoot, which, by the way, pro tip, you should be taking photos at all your shoots. Documentation is probably the second most important thing outside of filming it. You need to have it to show your work, people asking questions. So I took photos of Josh just fake speaking, because I knew thumbnails and Instagram and socials was a possibility. And in terms of the actual design of it, I just, one of the things when it comes to these is like, you really don't need to overthink it. You should just look at what the image itself is and then go off of there. Like a lot of people, I think when they think of Photoshop, oh my God, it's like, there we go, we're back.
What?
We're
No
back. It's not
way.
a clapper. It's not a clapper. We're not that cool. But it is
If it's not
like
a
sound,
clapper, then what is it?
it is sound like sensitive, but it's not like if the thing goes fully off, I can't clap it back on or anything like that.
Man. Is that even a real thing? No, we have to know.
I think yeah, there is a clapper. That's totally. Remember the clapper. Editor, find the clip of clap on, clap off, the clapper. Like, it's a thing. In terms of this, though, if we look at the image itself, right? It's just like a photo of him standing at the podium, right? And I'm just gonna get some text that I like, and you can even see it's like, oh, there's blue lines here, right? And it's like we have, even in the photo itself, we have established, with the background that we chose to use for him, we have blue and purple lines, and we have golden, orange accents and backlighting, and overall it's like a blue and orange look, right? So instead of, trying to reinvent the wheel and make the image something that it's not, I'm just gonna make all my design assets feel cohesive with what we actually did. You know what I mean? Like, it's just same thing, orange for accenting important areas, blue lines for additional flair, and then just white, which I actually pulled this exact color from his shirt here.
Wow.
So, because it's just like, it's what's in the scene, and it makes it
Consistent.
It's consistent, yeah. It's like, oh, this all feels like it feels like on brand, even though in reality, none of this even existed beforehand. This is me just pulling stuff from the photo.
And that orange glare around him is added as well?
So that orange lighting, that's the other thing. Your design, a lot of people think when it comes to like photos and videos that design is like a post-production thing. It starts the second you begin conceptualizing and shooting your stuff. Like, I shot the footage, right? And I lit it, I set the background, set the backlights. So I tailored a look for this, and that look has now paid off in an image that is very usable, right? if I had done poor lighting, if I hadn't taken photos, if I hadn't done any of that like pre-work and conceptualize what I wanted to get later, I would have been working with like a worse image, and that would have sucked. You can't you can't do fake edges, like fake backlight around a subject like that, in post. That's something you can't do. You can't do, you could put blue things in the background or whatever, but then you're spending hours like comping in out of focus blue lines that glow behind the person. It's like that, and that's overcomplicating your situation, right? It's like you should think about what it is you're doing beforehand and then capture that, and it'll save your butt in the long run. Now, a fun thing to think about, right, is that I've done a little bit of work on this photo, and I want you to try to guess what it is.
Okay.
Specifically, look at right here. Do you see how those two things are repeated?
Yeah.
That's because this photo
Copy and pasted the
is, yeah, it's comped. This is actually,
okay.
this is a vertical that I needed to extend the background for because I liked this image. And often I have the bad habit of I prefer to shoot portrait for my photography, but then occasionally I won't grab a horizontal. So in that case, you have to do background extensions, which is what I did here. This is the initial extension I did. And the way you do that is you just command select, get your image framed to how much you want it. Then command select your image. You'll see you'll have your dotted selected lines. Shift Command I, that'll invert your selection. So now instead of the photo, everything outside of it is selected. Then you're gonna make a new layer, go to Edit, and you're gonna do Content Aware Fill. Now, especially, this is like another thing, I've used this trick a lot. When you have simplistic or repeated backgrounds, or like if you're trying to extend more sky, Content Aware Fill is like your best friend. And there's things that you can do with it that I haven't even touched. And it, especially in cases like this will save your butt. Because now you can see that it's filling in the image here, and I can just press apply and then OK. And I'll deselect with Command D. And now you see we have a fully extended image. Now we don't have the blue lines repeated, which is something I did with just simple masking. So I just took the image itself and duplicated it with Command J, and then I transformed it to the upper layer, and I'll even remove this so you can see what we're doing. So this is the image that I've duplicated, right? And then I just used my masking tool, which is down here. So you just click that, you get a little white box, you click into that, B for your brush tool, and black will eliminate parts of the image, will mask it, and then white will reveal things. So I'll just make my brush super big, maybe not that big so we can actually see it, and then I'm just gonna remove a chunk of the background. Then we'll add back in our little elements that we've made already, and we'll take those added layers that we just did, and we can just shift them over. And because we're gonna, even though I'm seeing right here, there's a little bit of a glow here, but for the most part, we'll get rid of that part, because there is, the orange backlight is actually, you could see right here, it's bleeding into the lens a little bit, which is creating a different color of black. It's a more orange, and this is just true black here, and that's translating into the masked part. So we'll get rid of that, and then we'll just have the part that is part of the true black, and then we can just add it there, and then we can even just duplicate that layer now, and then add that again, and now we have a repeated pattern. That is something you could try to achieve with Content Aware Fill. However, when I tried it with this, it was having trouble recognizing what the pattern should actually be for these lines specifically. But that's just a simple way you can duplicate your background, especially considering that our background is very uniform. It's just straight black, matte black with graying. And then since we've already made this filled layer here, we can just add those things on top, and we don't even have to necessarily worry about cleaning up the edges of the mask. Because if we delete, we move those, it's ooh, that's gross, that's a garbage mask. But because we've done the work of creating our background, we don't have to do as much comp work. And
let's get that clap in.
There we go.
Ah, that's so cool.
So simple background extension, stuff like that. The other way you could do it is you could go to the image itself and then S, which will give you your clone stamp tool, press Option, select the part of the image that you want to start painting, and then you can move over and start painting it. And then, so we're gonna have to move the background content aware fill layer we did. So like theoretically, you could paint your entire background in like this, but content aware fill makes it so much faster and it's so much cleaner. So like you can do it, and for some details it does work nicely, but for the most part I don't like to do that because it involves destructive editing. For those who don't know or who haven't heard that term before, in Photoshop you really don't want to actually alter the core image. For example, like I'm making these changes where, let me get rid of it all the way. Like I'm making changes where I'm duplicating layers and masking things out, right? But if I go here and I'll enable this mask, right? If I disable this layer mask, the image itself is not affected, right? There's a little bit of a clone stamp here that I just clicked, but besides that, the image itself is still true. And then I'll enable the mask. So it's non-destructive. I haven't actually altered the core image. Whereas where you do something like clone stamping, and you can see with this little thing here, is that that is now part of the image. And to undo that, you have to Command Z your way back. So if you do something, right? If you say you clone stamp an entire background, and then you realize, oh, I want this part of the background to be different, you can't just go back and just like change it like you can with the mask. Or like, oh, I'll just delete that and just make a new mask and adjust it. You'd have to go all the way back in your editing, just Command Z till the end of time to get back to where you wanted to be, and that sucks. So non-destructive editing is huge when it comes to your comp work in Photoshop. Let's see, which one of these do we not want to keep? I think it was this one, yeah. So we'll get rid of that. However, there's an even more simple solution to this, right? And again, it goes back to your pre-production. Just shoot a wider photo, right? I'll duplicate it because I like where the framing is on this one. But I lied earlier, sorry. I actually did take horizontal stills. I remembered to do it this time, right? So this is and I will do this. I'll group these. I'll just click all of them and then click the little folder guy here, and then I can hide them all at the same time. That is a very useful tool, keeping your stuff grouped and well organized in Photoshop. I can't tell you how many times because as a church, we only have a limited amount of staff, and we have to outsource a lot of our graphic design work. And the amount of times I get stuff back, and it's just like the most unorganized garbage Photoshop file, and then I'm like trying to like fix it, and then I have to re-upload it so everyone else gets the fixed version. It's like, please be organized with your stuff and do good naming, please.
You know who you
If you get anything out of this, be organized when it comes to your Photoshop folders. Anyways, I have a horizontal image here, and instead of having to do any of that comp work, I can just do a basic transform with Command T. I'm holding Shift. That way I don't accidentally like stretch the image. So I hold Shift, and then I go all the way to the end, and there you go, right? I did the same amount of work in 3 seconds that it took me to do like in 5 minutes because I didn't do a proper, I didn't think about it in pre-production, right? So it's like, oh, thumbnail delivery, this is going on YouTube. I need a thumbnail delivery. I'm gonna get a horizontal photo in addition to portrait. So I suffer social, like I suffer Instagram, I suffer Facebook. I can put these images, I can put this video and accompanying thumbnails anywhere, right? Just thinking ahead. It's like, it's important, and you really gotta, when it comes to, working professionally, and time is money, it does matter. The ironic thing is, though, is that I actually like the vertical photo better because it showed more of the bottom of the table, which we'll get into the next section where we actually start making this text. Because seeing more of the bottom of the table here is able to just it makes the white part of work stand out more as opposed to it just being on his chest, which is white and blue, so it doesn't pop out as much. So in this case, it's like the vertical is technically like a better version. Like I would have, if I had to like pick and choose between the vertical and the like horizontal version, like here, this is the horizontal, and I'll like make it how I want. You see how like the O is now being cut in half by the table, and it's like a little bit awkward to read. And then if I wanted to compensate for that, I'd have to stretch out Josh way too much. Here, let's try to be a little bit more reasonable. And then I let go of shift. So just hold shift until you're fully transformed, then enter or return. Like if I wanted to do that, so there's like a uniform line behind him. Now it's a little bit harder to read work, and the drop shadow on him is like making his shirt look weird, right? So in this specific instance, the vertical photo is better. However, you know, next time going ahead, it's like, oh, what can I do to think better? Horizontal, where I can have a clean bit of text on the bottom, right? Again, I have no, like this branding was just made up on the spot. So, you know, it's,
Okay, kudos. All right.
you know, it's like, it was made up on the spot, so I didn't have the pre-notion to think of that. However, when you do have that opportunity, you should be thinking ahead and taking full advantage of every opportunity you do have. Now let's talk about some of this text here, right? Again, first thing you'll notice, I have text, and then I have lines, names and title. Lines will come into work later. And then in names and titles, I have name, then title, and in the title, now we have this part and this part are separate assets, and they're organized. The amount of times I see things that are not like that, and even like stuff like, oh, what's at the top of the frame? The name, put the name in the top of the layer. What's next? The title, put the title there. If there was a logo that was sitting here, I'd put that in between name and title, right? It's just a logical progression so people can understand what it is like what the work is you're doing. Like you can't, you don't want to be like, oh, you know, my title is like in a whole nother folder. It's like, no, screw that. No, wrong. In terms of the actual typography and the title, there's a couple things to think about. First off, it needs to be big, it needs to be bold. Avenir is like always a safe choice. It's like one of the fonts we use here constantly. So this is Avenir Black, this is Avenir Black Oblique, so it's like italicized. And then I did just white, like I said, I pulled like an off-white from the color of his shirt, and I pulled an orange from the backlight behind him. And the way you could do that is you just highlight, we'll change the just for kicks. We'll highlight it, then we'll go to our type layer here, we'll click color, it'll give us a color picker, and then we can select part of it. Now, of course, this is part of where it's like, you wanna have time for play, right? Because you're gonna find what the best version of the color is. So it's like, that's about right where I want it, except it's a little dark. So then I'll brighten it up a little bit, so that way it pops off more. And now we have a more interesting title that again feels cohesive, right? And then there is a debate, like there's always a debate when you have multiple lines of text. Because theoretically, I could have the be its own text element, 4M and be its own line, and then framework being its own line, right? Like, and not being like its own line, but like if you see here, it's all combined in the same, like it's all part of the same text box. If you're using similar fonts in a descending order, you should try to keep it all in the same text box, in my opinion, because you can control the vertical spacing for all those much easier and whatever your tracking is. Whereas opposed to like, let's do a hypothetical, right? If I wanted to add this Josh Hudson pillar text to like the top of the, and I wanted it to be small, to add something like that into this text box, it starts to get a little clunky because it's just too transformed, right? It's like too different. So in that kind of situation, then you're like, okay, I'll use a different kind of text box, or I'll make another text box and then I'll put the unique text into that, as opposed to being like, oh, I love my small text here, because then you're like doing like a bunch of formatting in one thing. And then again, when it comes to non-destructive editing in Photoshop and just trying to like operate it more efficiently, what happens if you want to change the M, right? Like I want the M to be returned down another line, or I want the to be back here. Now all of your stuff gets changed and you have to reformat it. Whereas with this, it's like, okay, if I wanted the Josh Hudson pillar, and let's say I wanted, you know, the to be down here instead, and then here, let's see if we can get back our, like we want to do this for whatever reason. It's like this is now sitting here somewhere, and I want this to be moved to here, so I'm gonna have to like copy and then paste it, and sometimes it'll paste it in this font instead of it being the one I want. Whereas with this, it's like, oh, there you go, the Josh Hudson pillar, right? So it's like, but that change was so much easier as opposed to being like, okay, here, let me, like, let's pretend this was up in here. I copy it, and it's okay, it gets deleted. I'll go here, I'm like, okay, I want to paste it, and now I'm gonna have to delete. Oh, nope, hold on. It's like, okay, what's the actual spacing here? See, it's like not quite the same as this, so I have to do this. Oh, well, no, that's not right, so here, let me adjust the tracking. And then, okay, I think that looks pretty close, right? It's just, it gets funky and it's not worth doing. So if you have radically different kind of text, it's worth changing. Now, let's talk about these lines that I did. This is like an easy way to add flair to your text. And it's something that I feel like a lot of people don't really use, or it's one of those Photoshop tools. Like everyone learns about your mask, but not a lot of people learn about clipping masks. And basically what a clipping mask is that imagine the text here, right, is a mask, okay? And then you have a layer above it. Whatever the layer above, like whatever is above it, will only be applied to the area that is like visible below it. So I have, let me see if I can do this and show you. I'll duplicate these and I'll put them by themselves so you can see it, and I'll hide this. So these are some lines that I made, right? I made a bunch of straight lines in Photoshop. I made them like wonky and curvy by going to filter and then liquify, and you get a brush and you can make them curve. I'm running as long as it is, so I won't go into that. But, right, like I've created this asset and I wanted to apply it to the text, okay? So all I have to do, and I'll even just do this and release it, right, is I'll compose it to where I want, and then I'll right-click the layer, and I'll go create clipping mask. And now you can see these lines are only applied to the text layer that's below it, and it's tied to this. So if I transform these lines, and I wanted to, let's say I wanted to have have the blue lines, or I wanted to have just the M, or framework, and I wanted to make this bigger, you know, I can do that, and it'll only be applied to the layer that's below it, which is really great because it just like keeps your work clean, and it keeps you from having to do the alternative, which would be, let's say because there's always a million ways to do things in Photoshop, and we'll hide this layer. The other way I could do it is I'll compose it the way I want, and then I'm gonna click my text layer, and same trick, same keybind we use to make the content aware fill. I'll command and I'll click the type. Now I see the type is selected, and then I'll click here, and then I'll click mask, right? And so we've achieved the same effect, but if I transform this, now I'll be transforming the mask with the text, and I have to like constantly remember to unlink it, and then I can transform this. And then more importantly, if I want to transform the text, right, like that is a much easier shift than if I had to like move the mask in addition to that. And again, because I'm trying to stay organized, once I've decided that this is what I want for the title, I'll make a group of that, and now I can transform all of this, and it's gonna stay the exact same way that I had it before. So that's how I did that title. And then same exact concept for our little orange bar here. Pretty much what all this is an orange rectangle, which I've stretched out and added curve to. Once you create your rectangle, you see little dots in the corners. You can bring them and make your rounded corners as much as you want. Rounded corners are very in, by the way. So you can round your corners. You want to try it? Oh, what a fail. What a fail.
Here you go. Oh, I'm just like breaking this.
As you just break the whole... There we go.
It only responds to him. No.
It's getting temperamental now. It doesn't like that I keep doing it. It's gonna get angry. Eventually, all the lights are gonna turn off. Anyways, so we have this rectangle, and I just stretched it out, rounded the corners. Again, made the same color as the text here. And again, I didn't have to do an airdrop, or not an airdrop, a color picker on his hair, because I already got a color I like. So I just color picked and then selected the text. And then I have these lines here. These are the same exact lines I have here, right? And I made a clipping mask and I just put it in a unique spot. And then the other thing is that you can have multiple assets which are a clip like in this like attached to the same thing here. So you can have multiple clipping masks like affecting a single layer. So I have 2 lines here as opposed to having to make like another rectangle and then splice part of it or anything like that. So I now have a unique rectangle that has some cool design assets. And even if I wanted to, I could click this and then group it and make this like name bar or something like that. So that way I know what this is and I can change this whole thing and not have to worry about it. Then in terms of the name, it's just basic text. A cool effect that I decided didn't work for this design, but you could totally do, and I actually really like doing this often. It's a very powerful effect, which is where you click the text, you outline it, you go to whatever is the bar, the square, the rectangle that you're putting your text on top of, you click it, and you create a mask, right? You're like, oh great, I just ruined everything. What you did was that you masked the bar to the text, right? You're like, okay, cool, what does that do? Well, if you click your mask and you do Command I, you invert it, and now, instead of having white text on top of a bar, you have a cutout of your type in the object that you were creating. So this can be a really powerful effect specifically on white. Like if I did this, and I'll change this to white, like white and this effect works really well. I decided to go with orange just because I feel like balancing out this. But again, you know, we can debate the the actual practicality of this design later. You know, it worked as a demonstration. It shows you what you can do. But that is a really powerful effect that you can cut out parts of other objects with your type and make something really unique and cool. Now, again, because going back to non-destructive, right? Whenever you do, if you have no option, right? Because there's some things in Photoshop that you want to do that are cool and they are going to be destructive and you have no option to like avoid it, you should always duplicate your asset right before you destroy it. So we have these lines, which are the original lines that I made before I liquefied them and changed them. So if for whatever reason, I want to go back and like, oh, I think these lines suck, I want to try it again, or I want to add more lines, instead of having to just like copy paste them, I want something actually uniquely different, I have that, and I have it saved, and I have not just, you know, the line bar itself, but like every single one of those lines individually, I still have it saved. So that way I can make that change and I have the freedom to go back and fix it or add later if I so choose. So non-destructive editing, super important when it comes to like being creative and then being efficient and also building yourself a safety net, right? Organization is like, a lot of people don't do it because they feel like it's inhibiting. It's like inhibits their ability to work quickly. But what ends up happening is unless you are operating flawlessly, constantly, which you won't be, at some point something's gonna get changed. Or even if you think your design is perfect, it'll be like, oh, yeah, I don't really like the top thing being like orange. Maybe I do want it to be white. Can you change that? If I had taken the name and titles, and like what I'll often see is stuff like this, where they will merge it, and now this has been destructive. Like if I hadn't saved this, this was destructive. And these are all like rasterized, right? It's like, oh, can you change that? And I didn't have this still, I would be screwed. I'd have to rebuild this from scratch and then change it again, right? So be non-destructive with your editing and set yourself up for success and the inevitable notes and changes that you're gonna have to make. The last thing that I did was what I call just like an effects group. This is where I add a little bit of sauce to the image, a little bit of that special sauce, so you can see, this could totally work, but you know, sometimes you want a little bit more, sometimes you want a little bit less. In this case, I wanted to add a little bit more texture because it felt like a little too corporate.
Some barbecue sauce.
A little bit of barbecue sauce. So what I did, and again, I keep all of this in an effects panel so I can see everything I have. is I added a dust layer, I added a LUT, like a subtle LUT. I added a little bit of like bloom to enhance. If we go back to the beginning, we remember we saw a little bit of orange here that was like bleeding into it. I actually liked that, so I wanted to enhance it with a gradient. And then I also added a solid amount of grain itself. And I'll go over really quickly how to do all of these things. We'll do the dust last because it's the most complicated. Perhaps the easiest thing is this gradient here. All you have to do is just make a new layer. Go to your gradient tool, which is on the sidebar. You'll want to click up here where it gives you the options for your gradient. As you can see, it's already set up the way I had it. And then a really powerful tool that people don't know with Photoshop a lot of time when they're starting out is that you can actually adjust not just the colors of gradient, but also the opacity of the gradient itself. And what I mean by that is here we have so that this color is set to blue and this color is set to orange, right? So if I were to go and make a gradient right now, I'd get something like this, right? Which could work. You know, I'm gonna use screen as a blend mode. Screen is like the default blend mode if you're gonna be blending something into an image. Like something like this where it's like a flare or noise, screen is gonna be your friend 99% of the time. Like that could totally work, right? But I wanted it to be a little bit more, oh, see, it's getting mean. Dang. Are we gonna have to continue?
We have to clap at the same
Are we gonna have
time?
to, oh, maybe.
One, two, three.
Hey!
Oh, double clap.
With the combined
Just got
power,
double clap.
with the combined strength.
Okay.
All right.
Let's get into it.
So that could totally work. However, I wanted to have something a little bit more realistic, a little bit more subtle, right? The blue is even though it's like the same color as shirt, it is unique and different. And it was not based off of something that was originally here, right? And the whole point of this, you know, design and the theory behind it is that I wanted to create something that felt like it just fits in with the image that's already there. And the blue kind of doesn't go with that. So I just wanted to add a little bit of the orange fill. And again, we'll get rid of this. We'll go back to our gradient tool, we'll click here. And these top parts here, these are the opacity of the edge of your gradient. So the black means you have 100% opacity. And if you click it and you change this to 0, the white means you have 0% opacity. And you can see you have the same kind of transparent background. Like if you're working in Photoshop, transparency looks like this. So like if you export a PNG, let's say I just had, I don't know, we'll just do like a random square. Let's say I had this square here. There would be nothing except for this square, and it would just be like an empty image. And you could drag this, like let's say, into a video, and you would only see the square, you wouldn't see all these dots. That's transparency. If you have this, it's gonna be white. So you'll have a white image with a black square. You want transparency for a lot of things, especially if you are, let's say I wanted to potentially turn this into like a lower third, or like a title that like is animated or pops in. I would want the background to be transparent so that way I could export this as a PNG and just drop it into a video. If I wanted to do something like that. Sidetrack. So we made the gradient, the edge of the gradient transparent, and by doing that, I'll go back once again for the final time, by making that edge of the gradient transparent, it has a natural fall off. So we have 100%, but then the color dissipates as it goes down the line, right? And because of that, we get a much more realistic kind of bloom. Now again, I used screen to get it to blend, and then I adjusted the opacity depending on the taste. I thought like right around here felt natural, but still affecting the image. And so that's how you can add little, like if you want like your filmic light leaks, you want a little bit of bloom, you just want to add some color to your boring black shadows. That's like a very clean and efficient way to do that. The next thing I did, and this is the easiest thing to do, is just a little bit of a LUT, which is a color lookup, and all you have to do in order to do that is click this little icon down here. It's a half circle, or it's a circle with half of it cut out. And you just go to color lookup. And these LUTs are all built into Photoshop. I have like a folder of LUTs that I use for video stuff, but these are all just built in. And if you wanna just like, if you want like a good looking image, Eterna by Fuji is a very, very clean looking LUT. It kicks you into like that teal and orange look, but a little bit more warm. So especially like in Sunnyside, San Diego, it's a great LUT to use. I use it for a lot of my video stuff, and it works well here. Just to add a little bit of contrast, a little bit of flavor, a little bit of life. And the thing is to consider, right, is that this effects layer, and I guess this is, you know, we're working in Photoshop, and Photoshop is a layered-based program. This effects layer I always put at the top, so that way it affects everything below it, and by doing that, it makes everything else uniform, right? If I had just the effects here, you see how it changes the text, and it doesn't make it fit in as much as it did when it was on top of it? Because now the bloom is affecting the orange here and the whites here, as opposed to just this where it's super clean, and the grain I have is no longer affecting the text, whereas this is. Now, sometimes you want that, like you don't want things to be affected by your, you know, effects layer. In that case, you're going to be separating out your stuff. But if you're having global effects, you should have them at the top of your layer so that way everything is affected uniform and it feels cohesive. Next thing is I added some noise and grain. This is also relatively simple and easy to do. All you have to do is create another layer. You will go to your rectangle panel. You'll just want to get black. There's no special color for this. I'm going to make it fit the exact dimensions of my frame here. There we go. And a little bit over here. I was holding shift and I was making it change all uniform. In this case, you can just pull it to the sides, right? And this is going to be destructive, but it's a black rectangle, and that's not something that I really need to save. To have a black rectangle ready to go might be a bit excessive, but you can do it. Anyways, all you're going to do is go to Filter, and I already have it here because I recently did it, but you're going to go to Noise, Add Noise. You're going to convert it to a smart object, and then you will be able to adjust the amount of actual noise that is added to the image. When it comes to making realistic looking film grain in Photoshop, I find that Gaussian and monochromatic is the best way to go. However, you could totally get, if you wanted like a more grungy 90s look, you could totally do like colored noise. And then if you like uniform, you could do that as well. But I find Gaussian and monochromatic to be the most filmic, in my opinion. Press OK. And then again, screen, your best friend ever. You'll go to screen for your blend mode. You can use other blend modes to experiment with adding noise and texture to your image. Multiply is like the other big one in Photoshop that everyone uses. However, in this case, I prefer screen because it makes the highlighted, pretty much what screen, what it does is that it gets rid of things that it thinks are black and leaves things that it thinks are white, or brighter by its luma value. Whereas multiply does the opposite. It gets rid of white, leaves black. And I feel like multiply just kind of adds a little bit too much of a dirty texture to it. You can see it looks more grainy. There we go. Oh, and I killed the AC.
The claps are getting stronger.
The claps are getting more powerful. This adds much more of a grain texture to the image. But it's just a little bit too grungy for what I want here. This is a little bit more corporate, more friendly, and this is a bit too much, right? You could totally do it for other projects, but in this case, I don't really want to do a multiply. So instead, I'll do screen, and you can see it kind of, instead of being hyper aggressive, it adds a little bit of texture to the background. It kind of lifts the whole image, right? It just makes it a little bit brighter, a little bit more matte, brings it a little bit more to being neutral, which is what I wanted to do. The last thing is dust. These little dust specks, which I had.
You said this was the hardest part?
And this is the hardest one because, as you can see here, I did some unique masking, which I'll get into later. In terms of how I got this, I actually have a custom brush that I use, which I just have named Texture 1, and I can use that to apply that kind of dust texture. And to make that, you actually need to go into a new Photoshop file. You'll create one. This is actually, like, this is, if you're doing a lot of like thumbnail or design work and you want to have brushes that like work well, you want to have brushes that like, you could just like put it in the center and click, and then like you have a texture that you like in your setup. You could build brushes to the size of your canvas, which is what I had with the other texture. That one is actually set up for Instagram posts. So it'd be 1350 by 1080. So it's a 1350 by 1080 brush that has a bunch of little speckles on it. And so whenever I'm making like Instagram reel, like not reels, but like if I'm doing like a photo post, I'm like, I need some texture here. Click, and then I have like a perfectly matted out texture thing. In this case, we're doing a 16 by 9 thumbnail, so 1920 by 1080. So we'll do a 1920 by 1080 brush, and what we'll do is same process that we did earlier. We will add a rectangle, we'll make a noise. We'll just do add noise because we already did it. And now we have our little texture here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna scale that up to a ridiculous amount. Something like that, and I'll even, if you run out of like room to do it, you can even just go to your like transform tool here, and you can just make it even bigger. Or you could just go edit, like transform, scale, and then you can just increase the scale even more than you want. But this will work for now. The other thing you might want to do is go to your filters, and you can go to your filter gallery, and this is where it gets really fun, is that you can change, and I'll get rid of these filters that are already applied for some reason. As you can see, it's already doing some changes here, but you can change the quality and the amount of black to white with your noise. Accented edges is a really good one to use. You could also do like dark strokes, and just play with the sliders. Like again, give yourself time for play, you know, mess around with it, see what crazy stuff you get. The bigger your image, the funkier it's gonna take and the longer it's gonna take to do it. So I think this looks interesting enough. We'll press OK. And then it's like, there you go, it applied dark strokes, so now we have this really funky, weird texture to it. That looks nothing like what we had before. And what we'll do now is, again, you wanna make, or I guess not again, but you wanna make sure that your brushes are in black and white, because Photoshop is gonna determine like the values of your brushes based off of like a black and white scale, and it makes it simpler for it to do. So then we'll go to, I believe, which one was it? It was edit, and then you'll do define brush preset. You'll click it, and you can see it auto sets up your like brush in the proper resolution, and all you're gonna do is name it. So we'll just do 1920 by 1080 dark stroke, which is a great band name. Don't bite that.
Dark stroke, let's get it.
Dark stroke. And then, just for example, now we have our canvas here. We'll go to brush, and it's already selected, dark stroke. And now I can apply that same exact texture, but I can do it in any color I want. And in the case of this one, right? Let's say I have a new layer and I have dark stroke. Now I can apply that texture to any situation I want. So like if we were doing like a cool, I guess you could do like a cool 90s thing or whatever, like a painty, like grungy, like street aesthetic, like you could totally like use a brush like this and make your backgrounds interesting. Or another cool thing you could think about is like you'll paint it, right? And we'll make a new layer, make sure I'm not changing anything. We'll paint it, right? And then you could take that layer and go to something like your text, and then you create a clipping mask. Let's see, where are we gonna, let's see, why are you not letting me do a clipping mask here? We'll go here and see if it'll let me do it inside. Oh, there we go. It was because there was like invisible layers directly underneath it. We'll create a clipping mask, and now that texture is isolated to just this. So if you want to make cool textures and apply them to text or images or shapes, brush tool and then applying a clipping mask is a great way to do it. So what I did was I have a brush preset. I'm not going to go through. I made it exactly. I already explained. That's just like these nice little dust bits, and I just clicked it and applied it. Now, I didn't do a clipping mask because I don't want it applied to specific parts of the image. I want it to be general. However, there are two places I didn't want it to go. I didn't want it to be on top of the text, and I didn't want it to be on top of Josh. Because when you put it on top of him, it kind of hides him, and it like makes him not pop out as much. And this is a thumbnail. It needs to be vibrant. It needs to be punchy. We need to see who this is. Faces are the main thing that's going to pull people to a thumbnail. And then it also makes like the orange of the text here fade out a little bit too much. So I wanted to make sure that these things were still accented and highlighted. So all I had to do was, and again, big reason why you don't destroy your objects and your layers. You have to go down. I'll go to the base image. We'll go all the way back. We've gone full circle all the way back to the beginning. Oh, come on. No.
Does that mean we have to double clap it?
Maybe, I guess.
All right, this is round 2 of the double clap.
This is got to be the final clap.
1, 2, 3. Oh wait. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, just barely. All right, this has to be the last clap.
It has to be.
My hands are bleeding.
I know.
Sir, my hands.
The clapping.
Right. Okay. We have the original image. I can go to here, which is object selection tool, which is one of the variants of the like AI assisted selection tools. You could just do like a lasso, like this is like the old school way of like rotoscoping and cutting people out is that you would go and you would like draw around him and that would make your selection and then you could mask it. That sucks and no one likes to do that anymore. And Photoshop is smart enough where you could just do your object selection tool and put it over your general subject on the layer that has the subject, and then it'll do a pretty good job of cutting them out for you, right? And if I had, let's say, up to this point, I had rasterized everything into one group, it would be selecting parts of the M, it'd be selecting parts of the work, it would be selecting parts of this, and like, it would have been a huge pain to get this simple cutout of Josh. But because we saved and preserved our layers, we're good to go. Now here's a little thing that people tend to forget when it comes to Photoshop stuff, is that just because I have this selection, I made the selection based off of this layer, does not mean this selection is tied to this layer. And what I mean by that is I can click off, I can click my dust layer, or because I already have the mask here, I can go, let's do noise, right? We'll go to the noise layer. If I click mask right now, the noise is now, just like we had before, now only isolated to Josh's like silhouette that we just selected, right? But again, let's say I didn't want any noise on him. I can just Command I, well, on the mask, and now everything else has noise except for him, and he pops out. And I actually think I like that. Like I like how it made him a little bit more crispy.
Yeah. You brought up the HD on that one.
Brought up the HD on his face, right? The universal noise, while bringing it to uniform, wasn't making him pop out as much, right? So I did the exact same thing with the dust, and then again, I went back to the text and did the same exact process. Actually, I'm leaving it on this one because it's more of like a graphic, and I want to kind of tie this into the frame more. But the main title, I just went down to it, Command, click, selected it, and then I went up, and here's the thing. Once you have your mask already made, you don't click your mask button again. What you do is you click in the mask, go to your brush tool, make sure you get off of whatever texture or things you want, go to a solid round or a hard brush, and then you just make sure you're on black, which again gets rid of things, and you can just drag. And because you've selected your text, you don't have to worry about like deleting all the noise here. Like if we didn't do that, this is what would happen. Right? And we have a huge brush, so here I'll make it smaller so we can see. Like I'm like, oh, here, let me get rid of the and the M. You see how now we have a weird cut around for your noise?
Yeah, I can see a little shadow.
Yeah, it's like it's funky, but because we selected the text, we only are going to be painting in that selection, and so we don't have to worry about everything else being altered.
Gotcha.
So that is like a great way to finesse your effects, so that way it looks like you still want it to be uniform, but that way it's still tailored to this. Now, of course, this is something you do at the end because notes come back and they say, oh yeah, I want this change to be like here. now you can see your mask has changed and you have to go back and fix it. So, but again, it's easier to do that than to have the noise applied to just this or not to that. And in reality, it's not that big of a fix. All you have to do is like just delete the layer mask, select it, make a new one. It's like a 2-second fix. But yeah, that's the basis of like going through and making a decent thumbnail. I did this in about, I think like 10, no, not 10. I won't be that braggadocious, but like 15, 20 minutes to like get an image, figure out what I wanted to do with it, and then execute it to this level of polish, right? And that's something that just comes with practice. Most people could probably do it even faster. And honestly, a big thing when it comes to Photoshop and design is that, like, again, I talked about how like people feel like you have to add a bunch of stuff. Even a lot of this stuff, you could totally forgo. Like with a thumbnail like this, you don't even really need his name. You really don't. Like it can be in the title of the video, it'll be in the video, right? So you don't really need his name. You don't even really need these lines here. In fact, you don't even really need that to be, oblique or anything like that. You could just make it the same color. In fact, you can even just make it all just straight white.
But then that would be boring.
Right, and then you just make it really big and put it in, you'll size it to what you need it to be to work, right? But you can make that work, and you can make this whole like background image just really big, and I know all the effects are getting broken because of that. We won't do wide Josh. Wide Josh is not what we want, but we could just do that and then not even have any effects, right? And of course, we'd have to clean up our little content aware fills because it was made for a specific scale. But like, that totally would work as a thumbnail. And 99% of people would care more about the fact that it was bigger and that the text was bigger and the face was bigger, and that's all that mattered, right? And then maybe you throw a little bit of your lens flare, and maybe you have like your LUT applied, so it's a little bit more punchy and contrasty. And then maybe if you're feeling real saucy, then you go and you add a little bit of like a speckled texture, and then we'll just turn the opacity down on it, right? That's a totally serviceable thumbnail, And that's what it means. There's like the engineering expression, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember it. It's like perfection is achieved, like it's perfection and simplicity are definitely intertwined. Like once you can no longer simplify an object, it has been perfected. Is like the idea is like it's not overly complex that people can understand it. Like it does its job. There's not a bunch of things that can break it, and a bunch of things that you have to debate about it, right? It's just like it's simple, it's effective, and it does its job. So when you go and you do design, like that is a really like of course you want to make your stuff unique, but going towards the air of simplicity and making sure it functions right and it delivers your message in an effective, efficient manner. That's the most important thing, especially when your field is in communication.
Did you just rap it there?
Did I? Was that a rhyme?
Just rapped it.
I'm just spitting bars.
It was just like
I lied. I said that would be the last clap earlier, but
clapping away, man.
bro, you need a clap counter on the side.
Counter?
Oh my gosh. All right, here. We're gonna have to do this.
Oh.
We're just gonna.
We're gonna clap it out.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Because
You got scared when you said that.
it's really a motion detector, but clapping has worked.
Weird. That's cool.
But anyways, yeah, that's just as I almost knock over my camera. That is
It's kind of worth now.
too much.
Down payment.
Too much. That's another video for another time.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's just like basic thought process going into when it comes to making thumbnails and graphics and design, and just some things to keep in mind in general as you approach your tasks and your projects, and making sure that you communicate effectively and can show your work in a more meaningful way than just a typical screen grab.
Dude. Well, I'm gonna do a first person, ready?
Wow. This is what it's like to shake Ben Smiljovich's hand.
Schmichkovic.
Wow.
Ben Schmikovic.
Wow.
Schmikovic. Or Ben Kenobi.
Oh yeah, so I guess we can end on a fun story here. So this isn't planned, right? This isn't scripted, but I actually got this because of me clapping, like clapping with my hands. Oftentimes I'm doing much of what Joseph is doing now, where it'll just be like a single operator, and I'll have like a camera on a tripod or something, and I don't have time to like run in front of the camera to slate, and I don't really need a slate to know what take number we're on, but the clap is useful for syncing your audio. And so I would either have other people clap, or I would just I'd have the most gnarly, loud, aggressive clap you could possibly imagine, right? And most people got it, right? But there's this one woman who works here, her name is Pam Ingold, and she's one of the sweetest people ever. And we were filming a reel with her, and we were in the lobby. And I remember I told her, I'm like, oh, all right, here we're rolling, here, clap. If you just give me a quick clap. You know, and I was like, no, I need you to do a real one. And she's like, what, why? And I'm like, because I need you to clap to sync the audio. She's like, oh, I thought you always just did that to like hype yourself up. You know, just being like, all right, let's do this, let's go, film. We're gonna start your, like, I was like, no, I'm like, let's get it. I'm like, no, I'm clapping to like, there's a practical reason for this. So then she went and she bought me a clapper. And I know, it's so sweet. And then it's just a bunch of nicknames I have in the office. And then because when you're a creative who's a triple threat, who's a photographer, cinematographer, and occasional thumbnail graphic designer, the real project you're always working on is anything and everything. So this is my like life's clapper. You know, take one and only one take and one roll. And this is my, it's the movie of my life. So I hope this was helpful for you.
Dude.
Have fun editing. How long? Was it like an hour?